excited to lead a panel with the folks who are actually leading, I'd say, the adoption and helping steer the adoption on both the tenant and ownership side. Really quickly on myself, I'm the founder and CEO of Pilot. We are a modern connectivity company focused on better fiber optic internet for commercial tenants. So we partner with tenants and owners alike. We've deployed fiber in over 400 buildings over the last 4 years across New York, DC, Philadelphia, and Boston. So this topic is really interesting for me because fiber is ultimately the backbone for most of this connected infrastructure and the Internet of Things. So with that, I'd love for our panelists to introduce themselves and we'll get started.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Stoltz. I am with the company Transwestern, commercial real estate services firm, and my area of focus is in experience in the built environment, studying how it is that the environment promotes and inhibits behavior, and increasingly providing that perspective to not just occupiers, but owners and investors alike.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Samira Ahmadi. I'm actually the founding principal of EnviEnergy studio. The focus of my company is on energy and sustainability consulting, and I actually get involved most of the time during the design of the building and trying to find ways to save energy, as well as gathering data when the building is operating and try to conserve energy.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy Korte. I'm a principal at Arrowstreet. We're an architecture and design firm here in Boston. We do pretty much every major building type from labs, retail, multifamily, mixed use, and one of my focuses is on how shifting trends in society and technology is influencing and impacting both our design process, the typologies of our buildings, and then what that means a decade from now, 5 years from now, as other tech comes online, and how that might change us rethinking our building types.
Adam Suber with Cresa Boston. We do advisory and consulting, transactional work for tenants and occupiers, and we've been fortunate, particularly in this region, to represent some of the leading tech and biotech firms. As I was reminded coming up the elevator, fortunate enough to work with the Abbey Group and getting VMware into the building. So I think our perspective is really informed by our clients, who ultimately are the users of space. And I suppose if nothing else, that gives us a vantage point into hearing a lot of the advantages and shortcomings of where the real estate industry is and where owners and buildings themselves are in comparison with tenant expectations. And there is a clear divergence.
Awesome. So we just had a panel where we saw actual progressive owners talking about technology in their space, and as Sarah mentioned, she wants useful tech in her building. She doesn't want an intranet for her tenants. So my first question is, where do we actually see progressive owners investing in this technology in their space, and how does that differ in brownfield and greenfield deployments? Let's start with Adam on my left. Adam on my immediate left.
Adam too. Well, it was a great panel we just had, and I think the point, and Jim Whalen made it inadvertently, but you're really talking about sort of the bleeding edge of owners who are committed to investing heavily in their buildings. And so that, what Boston Properties does, what Beacon Capital does, what Skanska does in terms of their investment in buildings is not necessarily what the rest of the industry is even able to contemplate, let alone implement. So there is a huge disconnect. We're fortunate in Boston, we're in like year 9 of a hot market, and you've got progressive users and a lot of well-capitalized owners who can together in the deals that we all do, sort of exploit the desire for some of these technologies, but that's not true once you pull away from, the top, 10, 15, 20%, broadly speaking, of the market itself. So in terms of the tech that we see that's exciting, we were fortunate enough recently to work with PTC, and one of the great things that Skanska did in their building over at 121, which I know was highlighted by the CBT team who did a great job designing it, they ran a wireless backbone. So in the building, you know that your cell phone will always work. This does not always happen, right? In fact, the experience that most of us have, even in reasonably contemporary buildings, is that you get close to the core and I don't have any coverage, and you see people on conference calls standing along the perimeter of the building. So simple things like that, but clear forethought, that really makes a big difference. And that's, I think, just an example of, greenfield investment.
Great. Amy?
I think there's two things I can talk from it from the tenant approach. I mean, this time last year, we were looking for more space in our building in Post Office Square, and we went the traditional route. We asked our landlord how many new spaces were available in the building. We knocked on our neighbors' doors. Do you have extra desks that we can use? Right? We're not really wanting to commit to another full build-out because we just built out in 3 years. And ultimately, we looked inward. We looked at the desks that we're using and turned our office into more of a pilot project. When are we in our desks? And started measuring our own staff ourselves. When am I in my desk? What task am I doing? Am I at early design phase? Am I in construction administration? What level of staff am I at? And we found a number of interesting things that we're following up on this year with a series of sensors and just basically blanketing it with a grid. And it gets personal, right? The questions that I want to ask of how our office is performing is very different than what the landlord wants to ask and the issues that we heard from the first panel with the privacy concerns. And then you couple that with how if you imagine 3 to 5 years out, there's, currently we're stuck in this debate of open office versus closed offices versus flex work. And I think there's a third thing coming, which is if you look at the experiment that Meta did last spring, they basically got rid of all their screens within their office and required their employees to work with AR. So there were no more monitors. And it begins to free you up in a different way, and it begins to allow you to have interactions in another way. And there were parts of that, if you talk to John Warner at Meta, that was a success. There were parts of it that didn't work quite as well, where again, it was this fear of change. And so there are those two scales, and managing those as we move ahead and looking for, it's a much more nuanced approach. It's not a ping pong table. It's how do I optimize for the 20% of the desk space that I have and use that and design my office flexibly.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the energy side of it. So the thing that I see and I hear these days a lot from a lot of my clients is that, okay, so we have the BMS in the building and we have all this data, so what's next? And I can't believe how many times I get a call from someone saying that our building is performing very badly and it's not even close to what the energy model predicted, so we want to know what's going on. So I think the most important thing in the area of my work is that, okay, we have this data and now we need to start managing them and reading them and doing a corrective action before the equipment fails and becomes a big part of the building operation and maintenance.
I'll round this out just by saying that I struggle with this question largely because of what feels like such a wide gap between where the perspective of owners and investors are relative to occupiers. Just this morning in Crane, speaking about or referring to CRE Tech, Michael Rudin was quoted as saying that we're in the early days of the convergence of commercial real estate and technology. And I don't think that's anywhere close to the truth. I think that's a perspective that a lot of building owners and investors have. But we've had building technology, or rather technology and commercial real estate trying to figure out how to live together for a long time. We haven't delivered enough value for occupiers. And so occupiers are thinking about, how do I make this experience more like the way technology performs in my personal life? And owners are looking at, well, I have an asset that'll last for about 100 years, so I've got some time.
So I think we have two different themes that I really want to play into. We have the theme of connectivity within the buildings, and then Amy brought up a good point, which is how do we actually design spaces that fit the needs of occupiers better, and how do we use technology to do that? And that segues pretty nicely into my next question is, how do we actually see owners and even leasing agents, how do we use this data to compete to find prospective occupiers and ultimately increase the value of the building? I think it's kind of obvious with, kind of LTE coverage across a 100,000 square foot floor plate, but how are people actually applying maybe some of the spatial work to design better flex spaces, to design better pre-built spaces? How are they actually competing in the market?
you touched upon it a little bit with this notion of predictive analysis. And if we can begin to predict when different spaces in the building will be occupied, whether it's a conference room, then you can imagine a building owner putting in the common areas, whether it's a series of huddle rooms down in the lobby or up on the roof deck, and that I can be in my office, look at when those are typically occupied, and then know that I can run down and grab it. And it's, again, making life easier. They talked on the previous panel about the Starbucks order and beginning to, have that. I keep waiting to, I can leave my car, leave the garage, and it automatically orders for me. And so it's those types of amenities that I think we as tenants need in our building, and we need that ability to grow internally in our building and then just, flex back.
Although, like every great technology, the capabilities in the abstract or when you're buying the software or the app, they're amazing, right? Salesforce is an amazing tool. Like, I kind of use it, right? And my iPhone is like, the most powerful device have ever owned in my life. And I get my email and I call my house and, I text my wife.
You still have a house phone?
Yeah, I mean, so my point is these are we're talking about all these really exciting opportunities, and what needs to happen though is you have to have organizations that back up behavior change, right? Because it all sounds great and the open workspace looks cool in the photos and it's super great for someone else, right? But I still want my corner office and the convenience that I've come to expect. And some of that, look, I mean, I'm joking about it, but some of it is, we talk about this a lot in our office, some of it is generational. I'm old enough to remember when I got in the business in '96 and all this stuff about connectivity and bandwidth, you're not going to go to an office anymore. By 2000, everybody's going to be working in a mountain chalet and just remoting in. And the truth is this whole conference and everything we're talking about here and all these opportunities are about creating better experience with other people in places, right? So it's very ironic. But I do think you have to have sponsors, right? You have to have in my world, tenants and occupiers who are working with ownership and leveraging the technology. Because if not, you just have a bunch of platforms that are underutilized.
Is that the competitive advantage, though? Is the competitive advantage to be the progressive landlord that has a track record of adopting technologies and doing it quickly? Because I think one of the things we're saying here is that the technology is out there and it could be adopted today, but we're moving pretty slowly. While we do have a telecommute culture in some places, we're trying really hard to cram all this tech into a built space. Is the competitive advantage the fact that you have the tech or that you're actually open to evolving and adapting?
I'll pass this and just say, I'm pretty sympathetic to the landlord perspective here that there is sort of a bright line. They need to provide a very supportive platform that allows and enables our clients to do what they want to do within their four walls, right? And there are places where it gets great. Obviously, WeWork, Convene, a lot of this huge opportunity where that sort of gets melded together. But I think there is, it's we have a client who's an autonomous vehicle provider, and we just did a big project for them, and they want to implement biometrics. So it's they want to be in the hip, awesome location with all the amenities, and then they want to be able to with the whisk of a palm print, be up in their completely secure space. And they don't want anybody else, including the landlord, anywhere near that. So there is sort of a have your cake and eat it too desire, and it's hard to get that right.
I think the exciting opportunity is to start to differentiate based on experience and service, right? Reduce stress, eliminate friction, add value to the experience. And if you can do those things, now you have an environment, or you can provide an environment that's actually differentiated from the one next door or across the street. Because as we heard from the last panel, it's certainly not going to be whether or not there's a conference center or meeting space in the building. It's not going to be whether or not there's food options available. It's not going to be whether or not there's a bike room or a roof deck, because to play in the game, all buildings need to have that. We need to provide access to that. So why would I choose your building over the one next door once you've decided whether or not I even want to show up to a building in the first place?
Any thoughts, Samira?
I can actually talk about my experience. I'm one of those people that had a corner office, and now I'm working from a shared office space, a co-working space. And I'm surprised that I enjoy it because, and I think it's because of the flexibility one day, and I'm not actually, I have a hot desk subscription, so basically when I enter the space, I can choose if I want to sit by the window or if I just want to go and sit next to the wall and have no interaction with anyone else. And so it depends on also the size and the type of the project. There are times that I'm working on an energy positive building, and it's a smaller size building. The goal is very high, and the whole team, the owner, the tenant, everyone is actually involved, and they just want to go with the high-end technologies out there so they can get to the goal. Sometimes it's a core and shell building that you don't know who the tenant is going to be, and you need to just provide the infrastructure for the technologies that are going to go into that building. So as someone who is acting as a tenant for one of these co-working spaces, I think the flexibility of the space is a key for me.
Nice. So we all know that tenants want flexibility and they want connectivity. Some of the themes we heard in the previous panel were that, flex spaces are obviously making up a larger portion of new development, and you have to be prepared to have 10 individuals in one environment and then 100 individuals in the same environment in days, on a dynamic shift. And so when we think about connectivity at the core of all these buildings, everything we do, whether it's DAS or internet access or the Internet of Things, requires infrastructure, most likely fiber infrastructure. And so how do we think about the role that connectivity plays? And more importantly, what does having that fiber infrastructure in the building do for the owner? I think we heard Jim talk about utilities, and I love it when owners talk about utilities, and I was listening to hear if he said fiber as one of the utilities, and he didn't, but I think it ultimately is a utility in every one of our built spaces today, because it's what powers those DAS systems that give us cell coverage, and it's what gives us internet. So if you are an owner that is investing in that infrastructure and you have great connectivity, how are you better suited to adapt in the future as more tech rolls out?
I'm not sure that just having the connectivity is the answer. I'd like to see more attention paid to dashboards that actually start to push out information that's actionable relative to the use of utilities or the pressures on those utilities as a result of understanding occupancy and use of a building over time, because just being able to go and access a system now puts the onus on me, or it puts the onus on a point of contact within the organization, right, to find that information. When rather it's we get push messages from, again, the apps on our phone or the experiences that we have in our personal life all the time. Do you want? Bonobos keeps reminding me that I should go pick up another pair of pants, right? So the building could also then tell me whether or not something could be adjusted, or better yet, adjust it for me, and then tell me that it was adjusted after the fact. So all I have to do is say, well, thanks.
And so all that requires sensors, which are probably connected wirelessly to some access point on the roof or the ceiling that is fed with fiber, right? So fiber is at the core of all that in order to get to the applied technology. Would you agree?
Honestly, I'm a little out of my wheelhouse. I don't know what's at the core of it, but I know the kind of experience that I want out of it. How about that?
No, it makes total sense.
I would second that. It's about the transparency, right? Infrastructure, technology, these are invisible systems, and how do we make them visual and map it in a way that the questions that I'm trying to grab from that is easily accessible in 10 seconds or less. And so the work we're doing for the military base planning, we're building out different dashboards on Tableau, and you're aggregating all sorts of information based on the lifespan of the buildings, how many people are using it, what the building's proximity is to other walking paths, kind of the health of the base, and you're able to then visualize it on a single screen. And there's more and more demand for that. We're doing it in our office space of how our office is performing, where people are going, how many desks are being utilized. You know, we do it for financials. That's the most obvious thing, I think. And it needs to be simple and it needs to be visible very quickly.
Preferably something that can be shown on an iPhone. So when the head of, when the CRE or the head of real estate is sitting with the CFO, you know, they can show the sort of whiz-bang element. And that, I mean, that's, I don't mean to make light of that, that's impactful. And that's, again, it's sort of like, the expectation now is the bandwidth is gonna be there, which is ironic because 20 years ago, like in the first .com wave, all of the talk about infrastructure was about the size of the bandwidth and the pipelines and level 3 and MFS and like the actual pipes going to the buildings. Everyone, and ironically, there was not nearly the amount of data, right? You know, I mean, it was a fraction. So there was huge capacity. Today, capacity is actually an issue. We really don't talk about it at all. So tenants show up, they sign a lease, and their expectation is, well, of course it's going to work. And then they dig into a riser cabinet, you know, on the, you know, the core of the building, and they realize, like, wow, you know, I've got 30 years of infrastructure that I've got to dig through here so that we can get our providers up. So I think there is like a real need to, I mean, frankly, for folks like us to help work with CIOs and CTOs to make sure that we're uncovering what are the advantages and or shortcomings. And again, it's a lot less with new buildings. It's with 30, 50, 100-year-old infrastructure and building stock that, you know, you really don't know what you're getting, and it's costly when you have to fix it, and often you have to fix it as the tenant. So
I think the irony is that the demand for bandwidth on the tenant side has increased over 1,000x, right? We have customers that use 1,000 times the bandwidth of a traditional T1, but the actual infrastructure sizes have shrunk quite considerably. The same cable that was placed 20 years ago is now only 10% of the size that it was when it was first placed, and it's an interesting challenge to figure out what's new, what's old, and what's usable. My next question is really about kind of the IoT, and this is again a buzzword that means different things to different people. But one of the themes we've been talking about is how these sensors and connected applications can ultimately talk to each other. And so how are we actually today using some of this technology to make kind of applied decisions within the built environment, or are we not? I'm of the opinion that we're not quite there, where I think there are certain landlords that have invested significant capital in deploying connected systems across all their portfolio properties, and they are able to make good decisions that could help them save a considerable amount of money. But I think in general, this is prime for new entrants into the space, and I'm curious to get everyone's take.
Yeah, certainly advancement in the space, right? We're heavily focused on building systems, right? On the performance of the elevators, on the HVAC system, on the lights, those sorts of things, right? Turning things on and off, recognizing when more or fewer people are in the building, and being able to adjust the performance of a system to account for that. You know, I'd like to see, and it's been mentioned both here on this panel and in the previous one, something that starts to approach a bit more in the way of predictive or proactive kind of adjustments or change, right? We know that certain things will start to happen within the building around a certain time, and so it doesn't require an individual to go and then make that change. It happens automatically, and then it's evaluated as a result of the change that took place to know whether or not it should repeat that the next day. I'd like to see us get there.
Going back again to my response to the first question, that has a huge impact actually on the building maintenance and operation. I don't know if we are still there for all the buildings, but the proactive maintenance and making sure that before the equipment, like the chiller fails, you go and fix it. And I believe McKinsey actually had a report several years ago and saying that the data shows that prioritizing the maintenance actually help companies to save approximately 15% on their capital assets. So that's a big chunk of money that I think in a lot of existing buildings is just getting wasted on a daily basis. At the same time, I hope that the IoT actually improves the occupant wellness and comfort inside the buildings and doesn't get the control from the occupants. We want to have a smart buildings, but at the same time, we want to have the technology and app in hands of the occupants so they can also have a control on it. And seeing some apps like Comfy actually makes me excited when I see that those technologies are also growing.
Quickly, I would say the challenge is who owns the data, who has access to the data, and how do we aggregate enough data in order to get the metrics that we need. I think you can fast forward a couple years, and we're all probably going to be in competition with Amazon and Google as kind of our industries all collapse on each other. It's difficult. It's something that we're grappling with across industries. We're in a couple talks right now of building out augmented experiences for some of our retail clients, from anywhere from large shopping centers to smaller stores, and even the developers that own these larger, whether it's a lifestyle center, whether it's a mall, just getting that information from your tenants to be able to use it in a useful way is the challenge.
Yeah, again, I think the dividing line between where are tenants and occupants comfortable with, landlords sort of tracking their employees' usage. I think there's huge opportunities for energy efficiency, and that's something that most progressive tenants want to know about, right? They want to understand that data. It's hard to collect. It's great to have comparison with a baseline of you actually overconsume because you have so much individual control, or you allow that level of flexibility. And here's what it actually looks like in terms of dollars and cents, and more importantly, just your carbon footprint, right? So I think there's real opportunity there, and that's something that for most commercial landlords, because they're managing the building systems, they have access to that. That doesn't creep people out. Coming and going in the building, okay, I check in, right? My car's in the parking lot in a suburban office building, or it's not. Those are sort of easy things, but then it's what I'm doing during the day, and I think there's huge opportunity there, especially for shared space, common space. How is it being utilized? And the art is making that not feel Big Brother-ish.
Nice. So with about 2 minutes left, my last question is there a specific technology that gets you most excited right now that's being applied in the built environment? Or not?
It's already been said, but we talk about it all the time. It's autonomous driving. I think it has a huge impact, but I think that is limited, especially in the first, I have no idea if it's 2 years or 10. I think it's completely concentrated in urban environments. The United States and Canada are massively car dependent and will be for the indefinite future, but there's huge adoption capability and potential in urban areas, and that's where you're going to see it, and that's why BP is looking at what would we do with the parking garage under the Pro if it weren't parking stalls, right? And that's really interesting, and that will have a profound impact. But as someone on the earlier panel said, there's no big infrastructure plan. I mean, this administration's talk notwithstanding, the Mass Pike's not getting bigger, right? But there's tons of vehicles. The question is just, will you be driving, or will a robot be driving? So.
Nice. Amy?
I'll second the autonomous vehicles, and I'll add to it augmented reality, and for example, what Google just launched. Apple launched ARKit last fall. This past Friday, you had AR Core plus Google Lens, and so it's this notion that we're tired of downloading thousands of apps. I'm sick of it. My phone can't hold it. I'm not going to flip through the screens, and so it's waiting for that. Again, the aggregation and the more seamless data, and you couple that with AI and image recognition, and that's where we're headed.
Samira?
I actually root for a better public transportation and better tea in Boston, but what makes me excited is kind of related to what I do, and it's something that USGBC has been working on, and that's ARC, which is kind of an energy and sustainability platform that is going to come into a better way of facilitating for existing buildings. So basically, you're gonna have an energy dashboard and sustainability dashboard in your lobby, which is gathering data and getting updated daily. So that's an educational piece, but I'm excited about it.
I'll give a vote for the opportunities around AI. I think we're pretty close to a moment where, as a colleague and I are having a conversation over email, and it ends with, well, great, next time we're both in Boston, we should continue this conversation. When I approach the building the next time I'm there, I should get a message on my phone that says, hey, remember that conversation you were having with Tom? Well, he's upstairs on the 4th floor and available for the next 30 minutes. And there's a room down the hall that's also available for both of you. Would you like me to book that for you and let Tom know to meet you there? Right? That's looking at what's happening over email exchange, calendars, room availability, and recognizing presence around the built environment. It can't be, all those systems can't be individual and can't require me to start to look at 4 or 5 different things to put those pieces together. But AI has the opportunity to do that.
Awesome. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of utopia just yet. That about wraps things up for us. I'd like to have all of you give a warm round of applause for our panelists. It was my pleasure to help moderate this. And I'll turn it back over.